My name is David Rattray. I am the editor of the East Hampton Star, which is where we are today, Main Street in East Hampton. I live in Amagansett. In fact, I live in the house I grew up in and basically never left. When the pandemic started to blow up in New York City, I think initially we had a sense that, well, it wasn't going to be much of a problem here. We were isolated, we lived far apart, we weren't going to get sick like those city people. And then, I think maybe it's the third week of March when all of Manhattan basically decamped and came out to the Hamptons to shelter in place. People were afraid that they were going to bring the coronavirus into our community, as if somehow they were separate from us. But we went from hearing about it in New York City to having the first case in East Hampton, which was a former writer for the Star. Really, by the beginning of April, we began to see the number of cases increase, the number of deaths increase, and a real sense of what are we going to do as a news organization? How are we going to serve the community? We suddenly went from being a weekly print newspaper with a weekly online component to really publishing daily and even within, several times a day as information changed, as the pandemic spread, as government, particularly state government, began to come up with different regulations. We assigned someone every day to watch the Governor Cuomo press conferences. We would then generate news out of that. We were really reporting on what was happening in real time, and that was new for us. The pandemic arrived, and it immediately shut down school sports, cultural institutions. Students began to stay home. Even crime declined because people were not out going robbing. They, I suppose, felt nervous about the pandemic themselves. There was almost no drunk driving going on because people were staying put. If they were going to drink, they were going to drink at home and not, go home from a bar somewhere. But there was endless material to cover. We continued operations. Most of the writing and editing staff went home immediately. There's a calendar upstairs. It's still on March 2020. Staff member just picked up stuff from his desk and really hasn't been back since. That cliche about the kind of people you'd want to be in a foxhole with when the shooting starts became really abundantly clear as sort of on the fly, reporters and editors and photographers were reinventing their roles. How do you cover a fire, for example, when you're afraid that you're going to get COVID? I remember myself going to take a photograph at a very, very early COVID ambulance call in East Hampton off Oakview Highway and watching the paramedics put on the suits and the sense of tension. And I stood 400 feet away with a telephoto lens and took these pictures. It was otherworldly. It didn't feel like the world we knew. It's funny, when the pandemic hit, our revenue just stopped cold. So by the middle of April, we essentially had no money whatsoever. As an employer, it was a terrifying moment for me to think that I couldn't cover a paycheck. And we began asking the community for help. And people came through with donations, small and large. A neighbor here in the village that we had really only spoken to say hi while walking their dogs, while they were walking their dogs, dropped off a check for $10,000 out of the blue and just said, keep on doing what you're doing. That was immensely gratifying, and it really made the donations made the difference between that period where revenue stopped and the first federal paycheck protection money began coming in. Because so many of the places we sell copies of the paper were shut or people were just running in and out, our circulation for what we call single copy sales did not rise all that much. But what did rise, which is fascinating, is subscriptions for mail delivery. We have a New York City service that delivers, and online subscriptions, as well as the number of people who were hitting our website just skyrocketed. We felt like we were an essential service. We felt like we were part of helping keep people alive, helping keep people fed, helping keep people from getting too frightened. It was a rare pat on the back, I think, for newspapers, for media organizations in general, to really understand how much we mattered to the community. It's gratifying. So many public meetings went online, and we were able to report remotely, and it actually, at least for us, improved our ability to cover important things that are going on in the town with a smaller staff. The level of participation and awareness of public meetings actually increased because of the amount of live streaming. Pre-pandemic, I would never run into someone at the supermarket who said, "Oh, I was at the zoning board meeting last night and I saw X, Y, and Z." Now you get people who dial into it live, they watch it live, or they stream it on their laptop for whatever crazy reason later, the Architectural Review Board or whatever, and have something to say about it. So there's this odd benefit to the pandemic, an improvement in public access to information, both for us in the reporting role, but that people can understand more about what's going on in their neighborhood, for example. That's a super positive thing, and I do hope that continues. So what I think I learned during the pandemic is that old line newspapers may be more adaptable than I had thought, and that our readership may be more adaptable than I thought. The core function of newspapers in terms of distributing information doesn't change. Just really the means of delivering that to readers. The people want to know what's going on in their schools, they want to know what's going on in their streets, they want to know why a giant house is going up down the road. I don't think I felt the paper was ever more important than it really was during the pandemic. That's where I think I really saw our work as small town journalists as part of the glue that binds the community together. And that was incredibly validating, I think, for me and for the staff, who did magnificently under extraordinarily difficult conditions to continue doing this every week. Writing obituaries for people we knew, writing obituaries for people who were too young to die, just grinding it out. It's a weird thing to say, but in some ways the pandemic years were sort of some of the best years that I've had at the paper. As tragic as it was, it felt very alive during the pandemic, in not just in a role at a newspaper, but I think even personally, maybe that's how people in wartime feel. Like you appreciate being here, and you appreciate the planet a little bit more. Maybe you didn't take a day for granted. You kind of knew that you were alive each day.